misogyny by this man. I will not. Not now, not ever.
That was not a normal workplace disagreement. The speaker was Australia's then Prime Minister, Julia Gillard. The speech was made in that nation's parliament, and the target of her ire was the leader of the opposition, Tony Abbott. This was perhaps the most public rejoinder to sexism ever.
I was offended when the leader of the opposition went outside in the front of Parliament and stood next to a sign that said, "Ditch the witch." Misogyny, sexism, every day from this leader of the opposition. Every day, in every way, across the time the leader of the opposition has sat in that chair and I've sat in this chair, that is all we have heard from him.
Since resigning as Prime Minister in 2013, the speaker you just heard, Julia Gillard, has been speaking up about sexism in politics. And she tells us how she sees Hillary Clinton being treated in the presidential campaign. Julia Gillard, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
You've always obviously been interested in these issues, but they came to a head in a very now famous moment in your prime ministerial career. And you seem to speak about sexism with a great deal of emotion, and I think that's why the clip went viral the way it did. Was there years of pent-up struggle that came through in that moment?
Yes, I think there was. When I first became Prime Minister, I thought, you know, it's so obvious that I'm the first woman that I didn't have to wander around going, "Oh, I'm the first woman. Did I tell you I'm the first woman?" So I didn't do that. Of course, the fact I was the first woman was very well noted. And when I first encountered some gendered treatment as Prime Minister, I ignored it. I thought, what's going to happen here is everybody will carry on about me being the first woman from positive and negative perspectives early in my Prime Ministership. So the maximum "you go girl" reaction will be in the early days of my Prime Ministership. The maximum, you know, sexist, "oh, are we ready for this?" will be there in the early days. And then it'll work its way out of the system and I'll just get treated like everybody else has always been treated. What I actually found was the longer I was Prime Minister, and like most governments, the longer you're there, you deal with controversial issues, you lose a bit of political skin, you're in harder political times. The longer I was there, the gendered stuff actually increased. It became the go-to weapon in fierce policy debates, a gendered insult. And so it did get to the stage on that day when I gave what has come to be known as the Misogyny Speech, that, you know, that was the time that I finally said, you know, kind of enough is enough. And I think it's come to mean for many women, you know, it's an emblem of what they wished they'd said in a moment when there was sexism in their life, but they either deliberately walked away and just took it on the chin, or they didn't quite know what to say in that moment and they woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, "Oh, I wish I'd said." For many of them, I think it's come to represent that moment.
Watching this campaign in the United States, do you think Hillary Clinton is being held to a different standard?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I think a different standard in all senses. The nature of the insults against her in what has been a very ferocious campaign, lacking any form of politeness or civility. The insults against her are very often gendered insults. The scrutiny on age questions, I think, has played out differently for her. I think people do see women age and come to a different set of conclusions than men ageing. I think that there has been this question for her of likeability. One of the key issues her campaign wanted to deal with was the widely held perception that Hillary Clinton isn't likeable. I know Hillary Clinton, she's incredibly likeable, and I actually think people have come to that conclusion partly through the prism of gender, partly because of this unconscious bias that a woman who's right up there must be, you know, a pretty tough sort. So I think that there's, at lots of levels, a different set of tests being run over Hillary Clinton than over Mr Trump, or at an earlier stage of the contest, the other potential candidates.
You have spent a lot of time in your post-Prime Ministership period focusing on the issue of women's education, girls' education, but motivated, it seems to me, because you really still feel there are significant inequalities. And you pointed out in a Politico article that even though you have Angela Merkel, you have Janet Yellen, you have all these very powerful people. It's still remarkable how underrepresented women are in the corridors of power.
Absolutely, and I'm very motivated to see that change. When we look around our world today, we can basically number on the fingers of our hands how many senior women leaders we've got. So that's nowhere near sufficient. Obviously, here in the US, we might well see a breakthrough with the election of President Clinton. But if we're going to have a truly equal world, then we do want to be able to look round countries and say that they are led by men and women in roughly equal numbers. To get there, we've got to increase the number of women who are coming into politics, serving in Parliament, serving in positions like Secretary of State or Treasury or any of the very senior positions. And to get there, of course, we've got to do things in our societies and around the world that give girls an equal chance to boys. When I speak publicly on gender, I joke about, you know, how I got a great quality education, but still they taught the girls cooking, sewing and laundry, whilst the boys learned woodwork, metalwork and electronics, but my education was a great one. Around the world we see tens of millions, indeed hundreds of millions of girls who either don't get to go to school at all, or they only go for a limited number of years, or their education is of such poor quality that they might as well have never stepped inside the classroom. And that's a problem we've got to solve if we're going to have women coming through right around the world to be considered for leadership.
Julia Gillard, pleasure to have you on.
Thank you very much.
Up next, climate change, nuclear tests, bikinis, and